An introspection. May this episode lead you on an introspective journey. Today, the full moon was in Taurus from 28 minutes past midnight and all the way to 10:09 a.m. I am using East African time. From 10:09 a.m., the moon has been in Gemini. Taurus is a bull slowly grazing in a lush green field, Kwaraha Zake. Taurus rules values and your personal possessions. If you had to pack and move immediately, what you could carry to move with you, that's what Taurus rules. Your money too, because money buys luxury, and luxury is a Taurian trait. Gemini rules the mind and hands, two sides of a coin, analysis. Do you ever wonder, why am I like this, or what makes me me? Have you ever wondered, how did that person turn out that way? And as I read this line, I'd written this episode, I'd transcribed it first before we can do this podcast. All that's playing in my mind are the lyrics of a Disney animation. And I might be a little sidetracked at the moment because the song is called I'm a Star from this Disney animation called Wish. If you've listened to my previous podcasts or if you've ever read anything I write about, like on LinkedIn, I have a newsletter, everywhere, whatever I write about, you'll realize that I always reference animations. So I've gone to listen to the song and I'm just going to read you some of the lyrics. And you should listen to this song too. Have you ever wondered why you look up at the sky for answers? Or why flowers in the wind are effortless and eloquent dancers? Or what forms the rings in the trees, turns a pine from a seed? What's passed down generationally to you and to me? Yeah, you can go and listen to the rest of the song. I feel like it will be more beneficial if you went and listened to the song without the lyrics or anything. Just listen to it and get your message from there. So that's a song that crossed my mind when I read, do you ever wonder why I'm like this or what makes me me? Have you ever wondered how did that person turn out that way? It's really interesting because I have been editing this document for a while and right now that's what's coming to my mind. So back to what we were saying. In the words of Goddess, we are the ancient ones, returning, remembering. Well, I have wondered about the three, and on my journey, I found out that to answer the first two questions, I need to answer the third. And the third question, it's a journey. In the last episode we had during the last full moon, which was in Aries, it was about generational curses I have broken on my maternal side. Between then and now, I found myself now looking at my paternal side in a much more deeper way. What made my grandmother like that? Why don't the women in my family have graves? So this is what I know about my grandparents. My grandparents were married for over 7 decades. My grandfather was about 27 when he married my grandmother who was either 13, 14 or 16 years old. I don't quite know the year she was born, but the research is underway. I'm going to reconfirm his age, my grandfather's age. I really have to reconfirm it because I think I need to recalculate that, but yeah, I know the age difference between my grandfather and my grandmother was quite something. Not like 20, 30 years, like say 10, 15 years, something of the sort. So I don't quite know the year my grandmother was born, but the research is underway as I was saying. My grandmother was a believer in African traditional spirituality and religions. My grandfather was a staunch Christian and he even built a church behind his house. A stone church, a big one. It still stands tall to this day and people go worship there. I never knew my grandmother was spiritual and all until this decade, when the pandemic began lifting. I am like my grandmother, a spiritual woman. I believe in African traditional practices and religion. I am not a Christian. I'd like to think that my grandmother would have loved me if she knew me. I like to think that my grandmother would have been kinder, loving, and softer if she knew me, because then whatever thorn had been in her side would have come out. However, my grandmother and I never got to know each other in life, and just like she felt robbed of something, I feel robbed of her. I grew up in a heavily dysfunctional family. So dysfunctional family, I have no records of my history because I never had a home until the day I moved out when I was 25. When you don't have a home, you don't have the luxury of owning anything. Your uniforms disappear, your books disappear, your clothes, your toys, everything. The only thing I own from my childhood that I can think of off the top of my head, because I have seen them in the home I'm building for myself, is the journals I managed to carry around and the pencils I used for my final examination in high school. I was an art student. Because of this dysfunction, I was never given the opportunity to know my family members. My paternal grandparents died before I could be able to have a relationship with them. I've heard about my grandfather and how he liked talking a lot. I'm such a talkative girl. I can keep you in conversation for hours on end. So they robbed me of my grandfather too. I have often wondered if I came from a long lineage of storytellers, of bookkeepers. I think I do, because there's no way I just happen to be such a writer, such an orator, such a talker, such a bookkeeper, and such an astrologer. All these deal with records and passing on of information. My grandmother passed traditions orally. She was also great with her hands. I too am an artist. She cooked very well. I too have never been taught to cook. It all just comes naturally to me when I want to. My grandmother was pregnant when my grandfather went to war. He was a soldier during the World Wars. During the times he came in between wars, he left her pregnant. So my grandmother had been a single mother when she was just a girl. She watched the girls in her age set have present husbands to raise their families with. She, on the other hand, was doing everything on her own, without the assurance that her husband would come from war. I wondered how lonely it must have been, because I know the loneliness of women. I know the loneliness of being a woman. Then my grandfather finally decided to be totally discharged from the army. He came back. My grandmother has been said to have been very harsh in words and actions, that she seriously beat her children. She also mistreated all her sons' first wives. In the family I come from, the rate of divorce is 96%. My uncles are divorced. Not all of them, most of them. My parents are divorced, and the men are extremely violent. I have grown up seeing violence towards women to the point of death. Femicide is not foreign in the family I come from. Child abuse is not foreign. So I wondered, where did this all come from? Everyone said our grandfather was the best man, the most loving man. But I wondered, why there's no single woman with a grave in my family if he was such a great man? Not even the most loved sister to my uncles. Not even the same sister who took care of her parents till her death. She doesn't have a grave. When I learnt of this auntie, I knew I had to leave the family because she was who I was becoming, and I did not want to fail her by not living better than she did. I live for the women who came before me and never got the opportunities and freedoms I have. This is my way of honoring them. I also wondered if my grandmother was really the villain or she was on her villain era arc. So I thought to find out where her villain origin story started. Imagine getting married when you're very young, being a single mother, then when your sons are grown up and accomplished you need to let them go. They marry women who are at least 7 years older than you at the time of your marriage. They have an education and skills. They have everything you never had. By everything, you mean the little things in life. When you are this woman in a patriarchal society and you don't know about the beauty of community in women, you aren't aware that women should be there for each other, especially since you did everything on your own. Chances are, my grandmother faced a lot of ridicule and hate even from her fellow women back then. I feel like being an African woman who was not a Christian back then was also a very difficult thing, and my grandmother was a traditionalist. However, my grandfather being a Christian might have given her some type of immunity, but I'm not sure if it really gave her immunity, since every time I hear people speaking about my grandmother being a traditionalist, they don't say it in a nice way. It's like as if it's something to be ashamed of. And my grandfather being a Christian, it was always like, oh, Danny used to be a traditionalist, but Kwaru was a Christian. So you see, he did not follow those things. He would pick what he believes in, what he thinks is okay, and then the rest he would just discard. So even before my grandfather came back from the war, I wonder what my grandmother's life was like. I wonder who was there for her. I wonder if she had community, if she had friends. Actually, from my memory, all the times I was in the village, I never saw my grandmother with friends. Sometimes I would see one woman or the other, but she was always alone. Always alone. Yes, daughters-in-law were there. Yes, grandchildren were there and all. But she was always alone. So, it gets very triggering to see a peaceful woman. So you take her peace away and you don't feel bad about it because you're so far removed. That's my theory of how my grandmother came to be. I had another question. How come the good man my grandfather is never did anything? Because being such a good man, I wondered, why are the men in the family like this? Why isn't there a woman with a grave? Why are the children treated like this? Why is my life so emotionally and psychologically difficult? Why is there no love, respect, dignity? Anyway, back to that question. A question whose answer I figured out randomly. I believe I figured it out. When you're in the military, there are worse things than children being shouted at and caned. You will not see anything wrong. You're desensitized a lot. So that's my theory for my grandfather not doing anything. And my grandfather died quite a while back, and I knew he'd not crossed over to the other side. The day I figured out this theory and forgave him was the day he ascended. It was almost like as if he was waiting for me to forgive him. And when I found out he ascended, I saw a tweet, and I'm just putting the pieces together right now. And the tweet said, the secret to your blessings, I'm just paraphrasing it, the secret to your blessings is forgiving your parents. Nobody ever tells you that the secret to your blessings is forgiving your parents. I've just paraphrased the tweet. And right now I'm thinking, I guess I needed to forgive my grandfather. This is a hard episode, by the way. This is a hard episode to do. But it's got to be done. I had to forgive my grandfather for everything. Because so many horrible things happened under his watch. So many horrible things. And I've ever been told, oh, he was old and he was sick and he was weak. There's nothing he could do. My grandfather was not old and sick and weak all of my life. My grandfather was old and sick and weak towards the end of his life. And I have argued with people who've defended him. Because, okay, defend him, you loved him and all. But the things that he let just happen, totally not okay. So even you, dear listener, You probably have such people in your family, people from the past, who you have a grudge against, who you're holding grudges at, who you've not forgiven, and you've also not forgiven yourself. For whatever it is you need to forgive yourself about. I'm not telling you right this moment as I say this, forgive yourself, forgive that person, let it go and forget. I actually do not advocate for forgiving. I personally believe that forgiveness is from the Lord, not me. I believe in that. If it sounds contradictory to what I've said previously, I believe in that. I also believe that I matched my grandfather's definition of forgiveness when I made this discovery. Anyway, moving on. Seligman had a theory of learned helplessness. One day I was trying to sleep, but kept hearing Seligman and Seligman. I know those names because I'm a psychologist who likes research, and I have come across those names in research papers. The theory of learned helplessness suggests that the more you go through distressing events, the higher the chance that you develop a sense of powerlessness and lack of control. When we look at this theory, we can see the following. 2 bullet points about my grandfather. Resistance felt futile given the nature of war and battlefields. Secondly, over time, the normalization of violence and harshness desensitized him to life events the general public sees as intolerable, alarming, and shocking. Eventually, these events made him passive in the face of suffering because he believed that he couldn't change anything, hence, learned helplessness. This doesn't mean he was mean and uncaring. This was just a result of post-war trauma. There are many people whom my grandfather touched deeply, so much that they named their children after him. There are many people who are not family members who will tell you so many great things about my grandfather. But there are people who felt betrayed by him and treated unkindly. They could never speak up, yet their voices should have been heard. And understand why they could never speak up. When everybody views somebody as their hero, even though to you they've hurt you in one way or another, if you dare speak up, a mob will come crashing on you. So you just die in silence. You suffer in silence. There are so many women and their children whom my grandmother hurt on a generational level. We are still healing. I do not invalidate anything she did, and I do not want anyone to let it go just because I've shed some light on how things became what they now are. Your feelings are valid. In learning all of this, I looked at myself and wondered in what ways I could be perpetuating the same things I said I don't want to be. I then saw that knowing where you come from and seeing how you are a reflection of the people who came before you helps you understand that even if you were given the exact same circumstances, without knowing your history, you will do things the same way they did, or worse. I hope everybody listening to this goes and finds their history. Learn about the people you come from. No matter how much they have hurt you, you're not doing this for them.
You're doing this for you.
So I turn around and face all my ancestors and hug them, a farewell hug, because if one of us is free, all of us are free. And I am free. Dani, Nindgikwe, Auntie Lina, Nindgikwe, Auntie Ruth, Nindgikwe, Ongili, Nindgikwe. Happy full moon in Taurus. Like I said in the beginning, Taurus rules values. My ancestors said, "You are the one you have been waiting for." My ancestors said, "I am the one I have been waiting for." And I say to them, maybe I'm the one you all waited for, but we got on different buses.